Listen to that. For 30 years, that sound meant America was moving freight. One engine, one company. By the mid-1950s, 1 in every 3 heavy trucks you passed on any American highway was running a Detroit diesel. They were in Sherman tanks, Normandy landing craft, city buses, tugboats, and the interstate system being built underneath all of it. Decades of total dominance. And then one decision made in a single boardroom meeting in 1974 started dismantling all of it. By 1988, the company had 4% market share, and GM was selling it for parts. The engine didn't get worse. The decision did. This is that story. In the mid-1930s, Charles Kettering had a problem. He was trying to build a diesel engine compact and light enough to go into vehicles. Everything he was working with was too heavy, too slow, too big. His own committee tried to shut the project down. Twice. He got one more attempt. What he came back with worked in a way nobody expected. A 2-stroke engine firing a power stroke with every revolution of the crankshaft instead of every other one that delivered roughly double the power density of anything else available at the same weight and size. The committee that had tried to kill it twice approved it for production. In 1938, the Series 71 went into manufacturing, named simply for its displacement per cylinder, 71 cubic inches. Available in configurations from 2 cylinders to 24, scaling from small generators to marine vessels to heavy trucks on a single shared design. One man, one more attempt, one engine that ended up in everything. By the time anyone fully understood what Kettering had built, it was already too late to compete with it. The Second World War was when everyone found out. Detroit diesel engines went into Sherman tanks. They ran generators, military trucks, and marine vessels on every front where American forces operated. Soldiers who lived next to these engines for years gave them a name, the Screaming Jimmy, because of the sound. A 2-stroke fires twice as often as a conventional engine at the same speed, and the mechanical result is a high-pitched, urgent, unmistakable whine that carries for a long distance. Soldiers who heard it knew where American equipment was before they could see it. When the war ended, the demand didn't. The post-war American economy was building the interstate highway system from scratch, expanding bus networks across every major city, moving freight in volumes the country had never attempted before. Every one of those applications needed exactly what Detroit diesel had: reliable, scalable, proven power. Fleet operators who bought one engine and trusted it bought the next one without much deliberation. Then the next. That trust compounded for decades. By the mid-1950s, 1 in 3 heavy trucks on any American highway was running a Detroit diesel. Not because fleet managers were being loyal, because nothing else could touch it. October 1973, OPEC cut oil exports to the United States, and fuel prices doubled almost overnight. Gas lines stretched around city blocks. The federal government imposed a national speed limit to conserve fuel, and fleet operators who had never thought particularly hard about miles per gallon pulled out their calculators. The question that replaced every other question was simple. How many miles is this engine getting per gallon? For Detroit diesel, that question had a structural problem buried in the answer. The thing that made the Screaming Jimmy so powerful? Its design required a supercharger running constantly, driven by the engine itself, burning fuel just to keep the air moving, whether the truck needed the power or not. You couldn't fix that. It was built into the architecture. Cummins and Caterpillar were running 4-stroke engines that didn't carry that burden. Detroit Diesel's own engineers understood what the fuel economy numbers were telling them. The direction their report pointed was clear. Start a 4-stroke development program now, before the market makes it mandatory. Management read it and ignored it. In 1974, Detroit Diesel launched the Series 92, a bigger 2-stroke. The reasoning wasn't stupid. The Series 71 had 36 years of production behind it. Customers knew it, trusted it, ordered it by name. A new 2-stroke was already in development. The oil embargo felt like a temporary crisis, the kind of thing that eventually passes. And switching architectures completely would mean walking away from everything the company knew how to build. So the 4-stroke recommendation got ignored. The Series 92 got the funding. They even called it the fuel squeezer, a marketing attempt to turn a structural weakness into a selling point. Think about what that represents. The same institution that gave Kettering one more attempt in 1937, when his own committee had voted against him twice, couldn't give its own engineers a single yes in 1974 when the data was pointing directly at what was coming. The gap between that drawer and the day Detroit Diesel finally launched its four-stroke answer was 13 years. 13 years. Cummins and Caterpillar didn't take 13 years. The market didn't leave all at once. It left the way trust always leaves, one contract at a time. A fleet that had run Detroit Diesels for 15 years came up for renewal in 1977 and asked Cummins for a quote. Not because the Screaming Jimmy had stopped working, because when the fuel spreadsheet showed a meaningful difference per mile across a fleet of 200 trucks, the relationship that had seemed permanent suddenly wasn't. They took the Cummins bid, then another fleet did, then another. Every renewal cycle that had once been automatic started requiring a conversation. And every conversation started with the same number: fuel economy, where Detroit Diesel was defending a structural disadvantage while Cummins and Caterpillar were improving. Emissions regulations made it worse. Each new EPA standard hit the two-stroke where it was weakest. Four-stroke engines had a natural compliance advantage. Every new rule was another reason to switch. Inside GM, the money followed the cars. Of the billions GM spent modernizing its plants through the 1980s, $100 million went to Detroit Diesel. The division that had powered the American economy for 40 years was getting funding decisions that reflected exactly how important GM considered it, which was not very. A Detroit Diesel spokesman acknowledged it plainly after the Penske acquisition. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, they were letting bad product out the door. Engines weren't performing well. They lost good customers. The 4% market share when Penske walked in wasn't a sudden crash. It was 30% becoming 20, becoming 12, becoming 7, becoming 4. One truck at a time, one renewal cycle at a time, one fleet manager running the fuel numbers and making a phone call. The Screaming Jimmy didn't die loudly. It was replaced quietly across a decade while management kept waiting for the crisis to pass. In 1987, Detroit Diesel finally launched the Series 60, a four-stroke, inline 6 cylinders, the first heavy-duty diesel engine with fully integrated electronic controls. Overhaul intervals of 500,000 miles, later raised to 750,000. It was precisely what the engineers had asked for in 1974, 13 years later. In January 1988, Roger Penske bought a 60% stake in the company from GM. He took something General Motors had essentially decided was a liability, selling it for what amounted to a fraction of what the brand had been worth at peak, and rebuilt it around the Series 60. Within 5 years, the market share had climbed from 4% to 26%. The Series 60 eventually became the most popular heavy-duty diesel engine in the North American Class 8 market. The thing they should have built in 1974 turned out to be exactly as good as the engineers said it would be. But here's what the recovery doesn't change. The architecture of the Screaming Jimmy, the two-stroke design that Kettering built in 1938, that powered the war, that carried the post-war boom, that put a distinctive sound into the American industrial landscape for 50 years. That architecture is gone from American highways. Nearly 500,000 of them are still running somewhere in the world. Marine engines, military contracts, industrial applications where the design still makes sense. But nobody is building new ones for trucks. The only way to save the inheritance of 3.5 million engines was to walk away from everything that built them. The engineers who wrote that report in 1974 understood it. The managers who put it in a drawer understood it eventually. 13 years is the distance between those two understandings. Detroit Diesel built the most successful diesel engine in American history by ignoring everyone who said it couldn't be done. Then it missed its most important decision by ignoring the engineers who said it had to be. They didn't think they could fail. That's exactly why they did. If you were around when the Screaming Jimmy was the sound of American freight, or if you drove behind one of these engines and understood what made it different, drop it in the comments.